Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Fearon, and I'm the curator here at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. So thank you for joining us today for Ancient Technologies. This is a conversation where I'll be soon joined by Casey Adams, who is a Cree-Ojibway artist, and Kevin Brownlee, who is the Curator of Archaeology at the Manitoba Museum. So if you just stay tuned or stick with me shortly, they'll be coming onto the broadcast. Hi, Casey, we're back.
Hi. Did you send it to
Kevin, I did. So
via text?
I sent him the link.
Okay.
So we are live right now.
Oh, awesome. It's getting chilly in my studio.
All right, so pretty soon Kevin Brownlee should be joining us, but I'm just gonna get started, and then as soon as Kevin joins, then he joins.
Okay.
So hi, everyone. Thank you again. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alyssa Fearon, and I'm the curator here at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. And I'm joined by Casey Adams, and I'm also joined with Kevin Brownlee, who is right here. Hi, Kevin.
Hello.
We're now live on the AGSM's Facebook page. So sorry for the technical difficulties, but we're back. We're up and running.
Yay!
So I just want to go over the land acknowledgement again and then get you two to introduce yourselves. So I'd like to acknowledge the fact that I'm here on Treaty 2 territory, the traditional land of the Cree-Ojibway, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Also, given the fact that this is a talk about ancestral knowledge, I'd like to acknowledge my own ancestors and invoke their presence into this space. I'm grateful for them and grateful for the Indigenous ancestors of this land who have laid the foundation for us to do the work that we do. So this is a talk called Ancient Technologies, and I'm gonna just ask Casey to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Tanse, Kapapam, Pimenat, Mikasuiskoyo, Nitisinikaso. My Cree name is Flying Overhead in Circles Eagle Woman, and my family is from Fisher River, and my mom's family, my dad's family is from Peguis First Nation. And we were talking earlier with Kevin, and his family also has from Norway House. So we've decided that we are cousins. So I'm very excited to be talking with my cousin today.
Great, perfect. And Kevin, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm the Curator of Archaeology here at the Manitoba Museum. It's a position I've been in for 17 years. I worked all over the province with a real focus on boreal forest and the north. And that partly comes to sort of my background. I was adopted at birth, but my mother is Scottish and my dad was from Norway House. And so doing work on the ceramics and archaeology of northern Manitoba is certainly a wonderful tie to some of that heritage.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So thank you again, Casey and Kevin, for joining us remotely for this talk. Again, for those of you who are just joining in, this is a talk called Ancient Technologies, where we'll speak more with Casey about her process, and Kevin will also speak about the process too. And so this talk is happening on the occasion of Casey Adams' solo exhibition, Gage'gajiiwaan, which is now online. So it was supposed to be an in-person exhibition happening at the Art Gallery Southwestern Manitoba. But of course, due to COVID-19, we had to sort of shift gears, and it's now an online exhibition. And if you just look behind Casey, you can see some of the works that are part of the exhibition. All right, so let's just dive in and get started. So Casey and Kevin, can you talk to us a little bit about what you two have been working on together for the past year and a half or so?
Well, I'll just start with how we kind of got to know each other. I was in an exhibition at Gallery 1C03 where Manitoba Craft Council put together a grant where Indigenous artists learn from Grant Golds, who is an experimental archaeologist, on how Indigenous pottery was made. And the idea was that then we would respond to that, learn about how to make it, and then respond to it, and then create an exhibition. And Jenny Western had orchestrated all of this for us. And one of the things that we were doing, we also went to Kevin Brownlee's office right behind you, where Kevin's right now, and we looked at some of the examples of pottery. So that's where we first met. But I've been fangirling for a long time and wanting to like meet Kevin forever. And we have a mutual friend, Stu. And so I kept bugging Stu saying, how am I supposed to meet this guy? How do I get to
Kevin, how does it feel to meet your biggest fan?
It's awesome. It's so wonderful, like, because there's like this seeing a technology that basically sort of was left a few hundred years ago, and then this whole process of renewal and inspiration and working from that, I think, has been just such a wonderful opportunity to work with contemporary artists. That whole exhibit that Jenny Western put together was just a great way of being able to showcase what we have. And some of the sometimes we get too focused in on the archaeology, and I thought there was some really amazing sort of interpretations, like looking at a pot, such as something like this, that's, painstakingly being put back together, and having Indigenous women saying, the role that women have had has broken down, the family structure is broken down, and we are now in the process of rebuilding. And that is such a powerful statement, and it's so wonderful to be sort of even a small sort of cog in trying to get that sort of reclamation happening.
Nice. Yeah, I was just about to ask if you could show us some of the vessels. Actually, before I do that, I just want to remind folks who are watching, if you have any questions for Casey or Kevin, please just type them below in the comment section. And then towards the last 5 to 10 minutes of the talk, we will be taking as many questions as possible from the audience. So Kevin, if you could show us some of the vessels that you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, so we've got all, like, the thing that happens with sort of the Manitoba ceramic tradition is it was all done predominantly through impressions made onto the surfaces of clay. So it was all, while the clay was still wet, they were impressing it. So we didn't have a really strong tradition of painted ceramics. And so what you see in sort of the American Southwest and some of the polychromes that come out of Mexico, that's not what we're doing. But the range of sort of decoration styles that you can have with tools as you sort of drag them across the surface, imprint them, is really remarkable as you start doing that kind of thing. It's a really quite amazing thing to be able to see these various pots. It's one thing to see the small shards, something like this or this one here. but then, you know, the impression of what a pot is, going back to this one, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, all of a sudden when they start getting back into this stage, you know, particularly the public can start engaging with what it's all about. You know, you can start imagining that sort of pieces. Yeah. And then watching Grant and now Casey putting these full-size pots together using this ancient tradition is just so amazing, because you know, it's sort of history coming alive in front of you.
Right. And so, Casey, when you see some of those vessels that Kevin holds up, you know, I guess maybe that take us back to that first time when you met him, and you saw some of those vessels. How did it sort of inspire you for the work that you wanted to create?
Well, it's, you know, when you hold one of those pottery shards, it's a understanding and recognizing that this was created by an ancestor. And that I know at the University of Winnipeg, we also did a tour there and looked at their archaeology. And one of the vessels on the inside, I actually was feeling around and I could feel the fingerprint impression. And it really brought me back in time and made me recognize, like, each vessel, not only each little piece, not only is holding knowledge, but it's holding spirit and the life of these women that made these vessels, and all that knowledge that comes with it is created within it. So it was really exciting for me. And it was, I often say this, like, I follow instinct, but what we call it is blood memory. And so my blood memory was just going crazy at that point in time, because it was something that I recognized. Just like the first time I touched clay, it was like coming home. I understood clay. I understood the language of it, the texture of it. I understood it right away. And it wasn't until years later that friends introduced this idea of blood memory to me, that I realized that all my life I'd been kind of following that trajectory, using blood memory, and also being guided by the ancestors. So everything that I did was always leading me to this point, to where I am. And so it's like Miskanau.
And sorry, it's like what?
It's Miskanau, which means in Cree, my purpose.
And so what motivated you to want to even to begin this journey, Casey?
Well, like I said, the ancestors were just guiding me in that direction. And what was interesting, and like, I hadn't really thought of it, but as soon as I moved back to Manitoba after graduating from Concordia University, I took like a course at the Manitoba Museum on Indigenous pottery, but it didn't really strike me at that point in time, mostly because we were in a fluorescent lit basement. We were using commercial clay, which doesn't give you an understanding of how absolutely difficult it is to work with the clay here in Manitoba. Like it was easy. Because, you know, I'd gone to school, I used commercial clay on a regular basis. It was simple to make these vessels. So as far as I was concerned, I'm like, why couldn't they just make it prettier looking, you know? So it wasn't until I met Grant Goltz and went out on the land, and he taught me how to look for the type of clay that I needed to work with, until he showed me all the techniques and of how he thought it was created. And it wasn't until I got to that point that I truly understood how difficult it was to make these vessels and why they weren't as pretty as, say, down south. You know what I mean? Like it's really challenging. And it was something that I knew I had to do. And I often quote William Dumas, where he says that you can't know where you're going until you know where you come from. And so I needed to know where I came from so that I could, you know, move forward. And it's been life changing. And so this is one of the reasons why I keep following these pathways that the ancestors keep putting in front of me, is because I need to understand that so that we can move forward in the future.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. And so, Kevin, I just wanted to talk with you a bit about the technology aspects of the work. So the name of the talk is called Ancient Technologies, which kind of sounds like a juxtaposition of these two words, but it's actually not. So can you tell us a little bit more about the innovation and just the creativity that went into some of these works, these vessels?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think the more and more I dig into sort of the technologies that were used by Indigenous people and First Nation people here, you really start getting an appreciation for just the breadth of knowledge and the expertise that's involved in that. And one of the things that sort of struck my predecessor, Lee Sims, when he was working at the museum and looking at collections, he started looking at the surfaces of some of these clay pots and finding that they had these real rough, unusual sort of patterns on the outside. And and people had sort of said, oh well, people use these paddle and anvil, and that modern potters will use this sort of technique, and so that's how they're just having textile on them. And he didn't necessarily believe that, and he connected in with Grant Goltz, and this is back in the 80s, and they started working up together. And I guess when Grant started having the same conversation, saying, I think they're making them inside of textile bags, or this can't be a thing, they said, well, you're crazy, but there's another crazy guy in Canada, Lee Sims, go talk to him. And the two of them sort of became this sort of force of working together and sort of reverse engineering the weaves and that kind of thing. And like the beautiful thing about making these pots inside of these bags, and this is a really good example, is the thinness that you can get these. So when you're putting a pot like this together, if you're using a paddle and anvil, it will tend to sort of collapse in on itself. The bag actually gives that extra rigidity to it, and allows so that then your pot is much lighter. Than if you didn't have that, it would be much thicker. And so there's really some innovation parts of that. I mean, the other thing that when I was going through school, I was told, like when European copper kettles came in, the primitive pots were sort of tossed out, and Indigenous people followed this one. Now I've subsequently sort of cooked inside of clay pots and looked at many of these things, and we cooked a moose stew for 3 hours on an outside campfire. And when we were serving it, not a single bit of burnt food was on the inside of it, which is remarkable. If you had one of those like super thin metal pots, they would burn in an instant. If anyone's gone out camping and using small thin metal pots, they would have a tendency to burn. And so the idea that there is this sort of like, the primitive versus sophisticated technology really gets sort of turned on its head. And yes, eventually they were sort of adopted, these ones, but it was a more nuanced sort of process of saying like, well, while my food now doesn't taste as good and burns, it does have the luxury of being lighter, being able to stack a whole bunch of these into one another. And so there were certainly advantages, and those won out, but it wasn't this sort of like immediate sort of process of, oh, well, this is primitive technology. And I think that really speaks to it. Also, one of the interesting things, some of the earliest copper pots are hammered out to have these round bottoms. And it's interesting, one of the questions I always have from kids when they see these clay pots are like, well, why are they round? Don't they know how to make flat bottom pots? But if anyone's cooked on a campfire, having a round bottom pot sits so nicely in the wood and into the coals that, the last thing you want to do is have this. And so when Europeans started trading in these copper kettles, one of the first things they did when they did adopt them was hammer them and improve them by giving them these round bottoms. So again, it's sort of Indigenous perspectives as to how they could improve this.
Mm-hmm. Casey, can you tell us a bit about the bag that you were holding up just a moment ago?
Yeah, so this is it's made out of hemp fibers, but this is a bag that I actually made. And it stretches basically as you work it. And the idea is that you put the clay inside the bag and you work with the you use, I love this tool, by the way. This is like one of my the best tools I've ever had. It's a scraper and a smoother at the same time. So basically, this is how you scrape the insides of the clay vessel to get it thinner, and then you want to smooth with this part. This makes very similar markings that I have in my example of pottery shards.
Right. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so, Casey, can you tell us a bit about your learning journey? Like, what has been the most challenging thing for you so far?
I think it's just trying to understand their processes. So not being able to use modern day technologies and just digging clay from the land, and then trying to figure out what combination would best be used. If it has too much sand and silt and not enough clay, you get a very specific outcome. It looks more like this, and I don't have that many shards like this. So, and you get a lot of lime actually deposits and stuff. So, it's just been really difficult just trying to find the right proportion of clay to silt to sand, and I'm adding a lot of crushed grandfathers to help with the firing process. I've never had an explosion yet.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah, so that's really good.
I think one of the things that I was always sort of marveled in sitting down with Grant when he would talk about that is he would sort of, like, because I always think of, like, here's somebody who's been doing it for 30 years, like he's the master of making pots, and he sort of says, like, I'm a junior. He says, I don't know anything. He said, like, imagine, and he's in it. I love the way he framed it. He said, imagine like 3,000 or 4,000 years of mistakes and improvements. And that's what you were doing, right? And so, like, at Contact, there was this, like, this generation of mothers and grandmothers and of people making these pots and built on years of trial and error, and this works good, and don't do this, and make sure you do that. And so all of this is passed down orally from generation to generation. Now, the problem with the adoption of copper pots and the stopping of using these is that there's this break. And so all of that knowledge, and so what Casey's doing or what Grant's been doing is all the sort of, like, it's experimental, because you're trying to relearn these things that were sort of passed down through generation to generation, and it will take time to figure those all out. I mean, I think the work that Casey and Grant do are amazing. I think they're great, but it's true. There's a much larger thing of those generations of learning that's there.
And so, Kevin, can you show us maybe a few more vessels as well? And I think, do you also have some tools that you may want to show us too?
I'm not sure if I've got any of the tools,
I do have
but
some.
I've got so there's some really just adorable ones, and one of the pieces that I really love is, we don't always get to see children represented in sort of the archaeological record or in the tools that we find, but here's an example of this, like, tiny little pot, and it's a Cree pot. This one comes from the pot area, and it's got these little things that we would call punctates on the surface, and they are sort of proportional to, like, what the mother would be making, a pot with much larger pot ones in there, and you can see it's thick, it's not really well smooth, but the kid is already at a very young age picking up that thing, which I think is amazing, actually. And then this one is really cool, because this sort of goes to what Casey had said. This one actually has fingerprints on the back side of it. You're not going to be able to see it in this light, but actually there are fingerprints left by the woman who made this pot, which I think is just such a cool way of sort of connecting into those people. We've got other pots like this where we've got this whole woven technology. Not only are they made inside of these woven bags, but you would have, like, a woven collar that then is impressed, and then you get this incredible sort of pattern up on the surface.
And so where were some of those shards found? What locations in the...
This one is near Thompson, Manitoba. This one is from St. Norbert. This one is from Lockport area. This is on the Winnipeg River. This one comes from northern Manitoba, Gower River area.
And roughly, when do those pieces date back to?
The first pottery in Manitoba shows up about 2000, maybe 2,500 years ago in Manitoba, and then is basically produced all across the province up until sort of the boreal forest is sort of the boundary zone. When you get up into the sort of subarctic area, the pottery tradition really falls off. So it kind of corresponds nicely with the Cree territory, which we know the Cree were making pottery, the Dene not so much. And so there's that process in there. And they basically made it all the way through right till European contact.
That's incredible. Nice. And so, Casey, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your work, your artistic practice. And so you sort of talk about birch bark technology, like that's one of the key series in this exhibition. Can you just tell us about your thoughts around this, the natural and the technological worlds, and how you bring those two worlds together in your work?
Right. So I've been going to the water gatherings, the Nibe gatherings in the White Shell for several years now. It's been happening annually. There was a 1 year where there was a break and nothing happening. But I've attended almost all of them. And the idea behind the Nibe gathering is that we come together as a community, inviting anyone and everyone to come and learn from the elders. And there's a teaching lodge that's out on the land, and people can learn about how important it is to protect the waters for the future. And, it makes sense because you wouldn't have this kind of gathering in a convention center. You're just not going to get that same sort of understanding and importance of it. So being right there, right beside the river, and there's like rapids close by, and then the petroforms are close by. So it becomes a really important space. And Kevin, you can probably talk about it a little bit afterwards about that particular spot, Bannock Point. But so there's evidence of ancestors being in that area, which totally makes sense because it's a nice flat clearing area. And so learning about the importance of Nibe, learning from elders, learning from students and scientists, talking about how we have to think towards the future. And so my work sort of drastically shifted towards, instead of thinking of now technology now in terms of being able to save us, I'm now looking back to that knowledge that our ancestors held on how to create that balance. And so what I'm trying to do is visually create that knowledge that has been passed down to myself and anyone who's attended the gatherings, and create these sort of visual maps of how we can use these ancient technologies in guiding us to the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's totally relevant, especially in this context of COVID, where it tends to feel like, which direction is humanity even going? Like nobody knows. So that's very incredible. And how long have the Nibe gatherings been happening?
Let's see. I think there's been 5 or 6. Yeah. There was supposed to be one this year, but we had to cancel. But I noticed that today that they've already posted the date for next year. So I'm very excited about that.
Okay, nice. Perfect. Cool. And Kevin, can you talk to us a bit about experimental archaeology? I know that this is sort of like a method that you use. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what that involves?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to how I got into archaeology altogether. I was not as interested necessarily in the arrowhead or the piece of pottery. It was the story behind that. It was like, what was life like? And I think the problem with archaeology is that, you know, things deteriorate, and so what's found in the ground are only the durable material culture. And so something like this, or the bags that Casey's finding, deteriorate over time and don't preserve. And so we are left with a very small percentage of what people actually had long ago, and then we're trying to recreate this picture of it. And you know, and sometimes it's a little bit sort of abstract for people, and I find experimental archaeology, when you are making a pot, I mean, I was fortunate, talking about birch bark, made a birch bark canoe, and in process of doing that, you know, like, you gain a huge appreciation for the technology of people in the past, and the knowledge that they carried around. I mean, I think we're so lazy in today, because it's like, well, I'll just look it up on, you know, YouTube, or I'll, what, you know, but like before, you had to carry all this knowledge in your mind. Like, you know, you had to keep all those steps in the right order, in the right way, to be able to make that canoe. And like, you know, now it's like, okay, do I sew this first, or do I pin this over here first, right? Like, I think we certainly get a little bit lazy that way. And like, so the level of, like, the way you have to sort of use your brain long ago, I think is really critical in that. But yeah, I think it changes that whole perspective when you start looking at how, whether it's harpoons and the whole sort of other technology that are involved in sort of bringing in a fish, or tanning hides, doing any of that kind of stuff, really is that part that I really gravitate to. And the ceramics are just sort of one part of it, but it's really sort of the you know, rather than sort of theorizing about how things would have been done, if you actually take the process and start, you know, making stone tools, tanning hides, you look at archaeological material totally different. You sort of say, oh, you know, somebody would say, oh, this is used for scraping hides, and I look at that as like, there is no way you would be able to scrape a hide with that. It's not nearly sharp enough, or whatever. And I think it's when you start having that sort of tactile part. I mean, I'm also a huge, you know, I have to see somebody doing it to be able to undertake. I mean, I was fortunate to learn how to tan hides, and I always wanted to learn how to tan hides the traditional way. And I read books and all kinds of stuff, and I had no idea how to actually do this. And then I was fortunate enough to sit down with some elders in Nelson House, and they started showing me the process. And then it was like, it clicked. It was like, that's how you do it. And so it was that whole process of being able to do those. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. What were you holding up just a moment ago, Casey?
These are tools that Kevin made for me.
Oh, nice.
And so that I can make markings on my vessels. So this, okay. Kevin, do you want to talk about what this was thought to look like?
Yeah, well, it's actually credit goes to a really good friend of mine that she's a student working with me in the archaeology lab for a while. But Nicole Skleski, you know, she and I were working on a pottery book, which we still hope to come out with someday. And one day she came in and she said, what does an umbilical cord look like? So, I don't know. Let's look it up. And so we looked it up, and it's got this sort of twist going on into it. And one of these really dominant sort of decorative techniques we call cord wrapped object impressed. And so you get these beautiful sort of patterns, and Casey's showing exactly what it is on her new one.
Okay,
and
nice.
When I start seeing those, and so we said, oh my God, like, everything has meaning. And working with elders and community members, everything has meaning. Nothing is done sort of randomly. And here's this decoration technique that brings perhaps draws from this idea of the umbilical cord. And it's that umbilical cord that connects this generation to your parents' generation, to your grandparents' generation. And there's an unbroken chain of that umbilical cord as you go back in time. And that's how they talk about it. And I sort of started thinking, like, wow, what an amazing sort of piece to sort of have represented on your ceramics. Another really dominant one are these sort of round holes. We call them punctates. And I can't look at those and not think of the moon or the grandmother moon. I think as we start looking at these as having much deeper meaning on those, I mean, when we go into a sweat lodge, the sweat lodge is going back into the womb. The pregnant woman's belly looks an awful lot like the shape of a clay pot. Women are water carriers. Vessels are water carriers. There's this unbelievable piece. The bump that happens on the inside of clay pots, called bosses, look like a pregnant woman's belly button. Like there's all of these just amazing pieces in terms of how we start seeing those. And even in the language, I was told that the word for a cooking vessel is in Cree is a skeek, and it comes from aski, which is land, and so or earth, and these are earth pails, and so people are making these ones, and so whether they're using a clay pot hundreds of years ago or a metal pot, it's a skeek is what they call that particular one. And so even in the language, we've got this sort of continuity of references back to the clay, the earth, as being important in that process. And I think it's really important as we try and engage people with this, I think, to try and sort of engage with youth in the community who are searching for identity. I certainly gravitated towards archaeology as a way of sort of even understanding where I fit in this world. And I think that many youth in communities and urban areas certainly struggle with, as Indigenous people, where do I fit into this world? And I think going back to your roots and finding out sort of where we came from certainly helps us as we move forward.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's a Cree word that my friend Tina Linklater translated for me, and I'm going to try to say it. It's Nimini Kosko Banin Ekiske Se An Kayask, which means our spirit awakens when we remember our past. I absolutely love that. And I feel like that's something driving me towards constantly learning and constantly trying to figure out from the past, because I feel like the more I get, the more I learn, the more I can then pass on to others. Because I think the more that we understand from where we come from, the more that we can truly move forward in a good way and in a healthy way. I'm going to read a quote from a friend of mine, Steve Lofton. He kind of says it perfectly. When members of a community assert control over their own lives and culture, politically, socially, and artistically, they go beyond oppression. Thus, control of our image becomes not only an act of subversion, but of resistance and ultimately liberation. So I think that's why it's so important that we do look to these past technologies.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that was so powerful. It just hit me. And can you also talk a bit more, Casey, about passing on that knowledge, those values onto future generations, and particularly how you involve your family in that process too?
Right. Well, definitely, I was raised without knowing my culture. So anyone who knew me early on in my career, I used to say things like, oh no, I'm assimilated. I'm fine. Residential school did its job. I'm okay with like not knowing. And I have a good friend, Kathy Mattis, with Alyssa, you know very well. And she just shook her head and said, "Oh, Casey." She said, one day you are going to start working on this, and you're going to start working on your identity, and you're going to start learning about your culture, and you're going to start working in community. And I said, no way. And sure enough, that's exactly the direction that I went in. So I give Kathy a lot of credit for just her understanding that I had no idea what I was talking about. And so I'm really grateful for her guidance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in my family, I've been trying to guide them in a good way. Like my twin sister went to a Nibe gathering. She participated in the sweat for very first time. So it was really touching. And my parents were supposed to come this year. So that's not happening. But I'd like to say that my son is going to pass on this knowledge. He's not there yet. He's not ready.
Well, he participated in the workshop last year with you, so.
Yeah, he did do the smudge bowl. We worked on it together, so that was great. But currently I am actually working with a group of ladies, teaching them how to do spraying bags, which is really the textile from here. Sorry. So I have this is a spraying bag, and it's written by Carol James. Her and Grant had worked together, and he told her what he was looking for. And so she figured out how to make these bags. And what's really interesting is some of the technology that our ancestors used, she has written in this book. And Carol James is actually here in Winnipeg. So I've been learning from her how to make these bags. And I have several other women working with me on learning these technologies so that we can then go out and pass it on. And my next step is also to teach others what I know, you know, about clay and about harvesting wood nettle and things like that.
Yeah, I was just down with Grant last fall, and we were sort of doing some more reverse engineering on pottery from northern Manitoba, because we've figured out sort of a style that's found in southern Manitoba and a little bit into northern Manitoba, but there are so many other weaves, and the complexity of these weaves, and you know, with his sort of decades and decades of experience, really sort of approaches these in a different way, and you know, can see past sort of what is sort of the negative impression of this textile and then try and reverse it. And so, you know, we've worked out 2 different weaves last year. It makes for a slightly different sort of manufacturing technique. And so hopefully when life calms down, I'll be working on making a different style of sort of bag and then seeing how well it performs. And I think it's as in the past, people were adjusting the technology to accommodate for differences in clay, and if it was a lesser grade clay was available, they made accommodations to be able to work with it and make it into these pots. And so again, I think everything was sort of this constant sort of evolution and change. And so again, it's trying to go through those. So I'm really excited about seeing that whole process, because it is, I mean, I think it's so funny, you know, we've often been sort of thinking about, you know, traditional clothes is sort of always hide. And I think, man, you know, you talk to Grant and he says, no, he said there would have been like a whole woven industry. And there's even reference down in Minnesota by one of the lakes that he's worked at, Net Lake. And in the Fur Trade Journal, they said, oh, those are the people of the woven cloth. It's like, oh, so the people that actually do weaving from nettle fiber to be able to do these. So again, it's this whole unbelievable pattern. That's it.
This is actually a woven outfit that was pre-contact. Look at the sophistication of that. Like, it's pretty amazing.
Just the detail. Wow.
Yeah, it's Salt River in Arizona.
Okay, nice.
I always say the warmer the climate, the more time they have on their hands to do like intricate stuff like that.
I mean, yeah, you can't.
Whereas up north, we're like survival.
Yeah, it's cold. You gotta just dress warm. Yeah. So I want to take some time to answer or to put some questions from the audience to you guys. We've had quite a few questions coming in. Okay, so let me see where I should begin. Okay, so I'm going to begin with this question that's coming in from Brittany Weber. She says, hi, Kevin. Do you have any information about the residues from the pottery you've shown? I would be interested in knowing what types of meat or plants were cooked in them.
A little bit of that. Certainly, we've been doing tests on, so some of the residue that's on the inside of the pots, we can find things like phytoliths and starch grains. And so we can see corn, beans, squash, wild plants. And so we can see whether they're eating prairie turnip or some of these other ones, which is, and wild rice. So there's this really sort of unbelievable sort of realm of world that you can sort of get into. You can also start looking at this the fats, and then sort of look into what kind of animals are cooking in that as well. It's a pretty expensive and a very specialized sort of area, and so we do a little bit of that here. We certainly know that some of these pots, we've got wild rice showing up, corn, beans, and squash really show up quite a lot, even into the boreal forest. And I think this is one of the sort of interesting things, is that we think of these as agricultural products of what people were growing on the plains down in maybe southern Manitoba and down into the Dakotas. But we're starting to see, this showing up in 1,500-year-old pots in the Paw area. So yeah, it's really cool to see that sort of next sort of stage as we start looking at these. So it's totally a process that is growing leaps and bounds with technology.
Mm.
Hey, Brett and Brittany.
Nice. Okay, I have another question coming in, and it's from Dene Sinclair. So Dene asks, you mentioned pots as cooking tools. Are there any preservation benefits or abilities in the use of clay pots?
Certainly the performance, I think, is really was the one that I really noticed.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't seen, like, again, I think it's as we start experimenting and testing some of these, we can really get into some of the other sort of uses of them. We certainly know they were going to be used for carrying water and that kind of thing. What other things were they doing? Any fermenting or that kind of stuff? Yeah, there's sort of realms of possibilities of how they were using the pots and what they were using them for. But yeah,
yeah, I know that you talked about the I guess the quality or the taste of the food and it being less likely to burn the food. So there's that.
It's crazy. Like, it's crazy. Apparently there is a quote in one of these fur trader journals that do talk about how the flavor of food, it was women talking about how poor the food tasted after the introduction of metal pots, which I think is just so, it's wonderful, right? And it's something we don't necessarily think of. I think now, as people are cooking and paying more attention to, traditional ways of doing these things. I mean, like, one of the things that I know Grant does down in the States is, he'll cook stews and that kind of thing for feasts. And so he'll show up at a feast on a First Nation or Native American reservation down in the States, and will bring these sort of like meals that he's cooked inside of these clay pots, and the elders just are like fanatical about it. It's amazing, right? But it's just one of these things where, here you are touching the past. I mean, when we made pots or cooked a meal in northern Manitoba up in Cross Lake, it was probably the first meal cooked in a clay pot in like 250 years. Like how cool is that?
So amazing.
Actually, I wanted to talk about that a little bit more. We don't have too much time left, but the role of women in the community. And I know, Casey, that's also kind of like a running theme in your work as well. Can you just sort of talk to the people a little bit more about the significance and the role of women?
Well, I mean, they were so important to the community. Women held so much information, so much knowledge. Her roles and responsibilities were tremendous. I mean, in my own family history, you hear that if you were a white settler coming over to Manitoba and you wanted to survive, you better take up a native wife if you want to live, because she knew how to go for food, how to forage for food, how to set up camp, how to make sure that you stay alive. And so that is my family history, basically, right there. A lot of strong women in the community in my family history, where they were skilled at so many different things. And what's really interesting is how my blood memory, I'm really walking in the footsteps of my ancestors. Anyone who's followed my career knows that I'm not just a ceramicist. I'm not just a photographer. I'm not just a sculptor. Basically touch so many different mediums, and I'm constantly learning these different skills and jumping between them all. So I have at least 8 different projects going all at once, which is exactly how the women live their lives as well. So I find that really exciting, but I also feel that, you know, a lot of people say, well, women, they're not supposed to touch drums, they're not supposed to be drumming. But I've heard where people say, well, no, the reason why women are picking up drums is because the men can't do it alone, and that we need to build up our community again, and that the women are taking up that role to help guide our community in a better way. And I like to think that I'm doing a small sort of portion to help the community and feel pride and feel understand that everything that we learned in school and public school system was wrong, and that the technologies that our people had weren't primitive, they were actually quite sophisticated. And also understanding balance within our environment, but also understanding the connection of everything that's around us, all living things and beings. So I think that is a big role in a woman's job, is to passing on that knowledge, passing on that idea of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the pottery, from an archaeology standpoint, is such a great way of being able to look at the role of women, because that is sort of, all accounts say that it was the women who were the ones that were the predominant ceramic people, and so that is an expression of them as women, as in many cases for the Cree, they were mostly following a matrilineal society, and so it was the women that were the ones that were in charge, you know, and everything kind of gets a little bit messed up when European contact happens, because then you know, the dynamics are, here are these trader men wanting to deal with the men on the other side, and so there was a whole change to that process, and I think yeah, it's really empowering to see that sort of that elevation again of women within our communities.
Mm-hmm. Perfect, thank you. So just a couple more questions before we wrap up. So one question coming in from Des Mentuck. Des asks, has there been any research into the Anishinaabe, Nehiwa, etc. names for these vessels?
I kind of touched on that with the way the Cree in the north are referring to them as a skeek, and how a skeek is a Cree word meaning basically earth pails or earth containers made from the earth. But I would expect similar things within the Anishinaabe language as well. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of pieces in there that can be drawn out.
Yeah, I believe Sherry Kopanis, who's from Treaty 3 territory, she translated Akigok as, so Aki, you know, you have that earth reference again. So Akigok as being like the vessel.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This last question, although I think you already touched on this, Casey, what fiber are you using in the spraying bags? And are you making the cordage as well?
Sorry. I love this. I love this little one. And so I like to show it off. It's got like this little pointy bottom and everything. I work with wood nettle. So every September, just before the first frost, I will go down by the water and I will harvest wood nettle. And I have some here actually. And it's not stinging nettle. Stinging nettle is an introduced species. Wood nettle has broad leaves like this, and it stings, but the sting only lasts for like 10 minutes, not even, whereas stinging nettle can last for like a week. It's used as a medicine for anti-inflammatory, but the outer bark, you can actually easily pull it, and you can make cordage like instant. So you can make cords really quickly, and I can almost see like the women sitting down by the fire, listening or storytelling or laughing, and just sitting there making cordage, you know, with this stuff. Because I have stuff that I harvested 3 years ago, and I'm still using that material. So you can hydrate it and work with it quite quickly.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out what they were using in the north, because wood nettle is great, but it basically, Winnipeg is about this, and maybe a little bit up the Red River is about as far north as it goes. We've got evidence of these textiles being in northern Manitoba, and so I've played around a little bit with using willow, which grows all over the place. And so again, it's really early, but again, I think it's sort of part of that process of sort of experimental archaeology and just playing around, and how do you make fibers and indigenous plants, to what Casey said, rather than sort of introduced species. How do we make these things work? Because that's really what they were doing.
Yeah, there's if anyone's interested, there's also basswood as well that was used, and there was also cedar that you could use as well. And oh geez, my mind is blanking on her name, but there's a woman that's working on those older fibers. She's doing research. She's doing her PhD right now on it, and I can't think of her name.
Dogbane is another amazing one, and it is super strong. It's way stronger than wood nettle, but it is picky to work with. But once you get it, I mean, it comes out almost looking like silk. Like Grant has worked with it, and like he had sort of a run of this stuff, and like it's like silk. It's amazing.
Wow. So I want to just ask one last question before we wrap up, and it's because it's coming in from someone who I think is related to you, Kevin. Their name is Meredith Brownlee.
Hey.
Awesome.
I think you answered something like this. She asked, how far north does pottery extend northward? Did Inuit use pottery?
It's actually a good question. In Manitoba, we basically see that sort of tree line and sort of boundary up into Big Sand Lake, which is part of the Seal River, is the furthest north we've seen pottery in Manitoba. Now, and there isn't a real well-established sort of Inuit traditional pottery, but there has been a little bit of work. I think it was on Banks Island in the last 10 or 15 years, and they've found what they believe to be pottery. They've done some CT scanning of it, so it looks like even the Inuit had some kind of tradition of that. So yeah, it really depends. I think part of it also depends on having access to good clay. When you move into places like Alberta, they don't have that really well-developed ceramic industry, because they don't have clay. Like, we're in the middle of like Lake Agassiz, and so there is clay everywhere in Manitoba. But you go into like Alberta, and there are many places where you don't have good access to clay.
Yeah, and I just went to the National Museum in Hull, and I was looking at their archives of clay shards, and there was one in Great Slave Lake, an example, and it was so thick. And it was almost like the thickness of, say, soapstone.
Yeah.
And it had lots of sand. Like, it was a high sand content. You could tell, like, I could tell, because based on my own experiments and stuff like that, it had a lot of like rocks in it. So a lot of grandfather rocks, just so that, because it's so thick, it needs the air to get out when it's going through a firing. So that it doesn't explode. So this had like tons of rock in it. Tons of like that kind of material, and it was super thick. Like, it was crazy. So it was really interesting how it reminded me of like soapstone, but it was a clay shard.
I think that sort of speaks to sort of the ingenuity of how this technology was then adapted to situations where you had lesser quality clays or that kind of thing, and they were they were determined to make it work, right? And they would then sort of say, oh, well, if I do this based on like our oral tradition and our traditional knowledge, we know this should make it work. And so again, I think it speaks to really that sort of level.
Perfect. So any final comments that you guys want to say before we wrap up?
I kind of feel like I could do this all day.
Yeah, I think I asked Casey at the beginning. I said, "So what are we going to talk about?" And it's like, "Oh, well,
it doesn't matter.
We both like to talk. Like, it'll be no problem to fill up our time."
So Kevin and I actually, I like to visit my cousin every so often and go over to his office so that we can totally just geek out and talk clay and fibers and stuff like that. So yeah, seriously, this could keep going as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah, no, it's. I think that the really cool thing is just the whole, seeing this sort of, yeah, resurgence of this as a technology and recognizing the significance of women, and this is something, and also really that I mean, as an archaeologist, as a First Nation archaeologist, the idea of communities taking ownership of that past, I think, is such a powerful part, and as this whole ceramic thing that has been taken off in the last few years, sort of led by Casey up here, I just think it's such an awesome expression of that. And I think it's drawing on those taking ownership of how the past influences our future.
Mm-hmm. And also I'd like to see more First Nation archaeologists. And I think that's really important because what doesn't happen is, from a scholarly point of view, the spirit gets left out. And those understanding of connections between land and water gets left out. So, it's so important to have somebody like Kevin in this position to be like a role model for future generations. And I think that's really important.
Perfect. Well, that's a great way to end the talk. Well, I want to say thank you to Casey and Kevin for sharing your knowledge with us today. Big hearts, exactly. And I want to say that Casey's online exhibition, it is online now. So go to agsm.ca so that you can access the link so that you can see her work, her incredible work. And this conversation is going to be saved and accessible on the AGSM's Facebook page as well as the AGSM's website. And thank you for everyone who tuned in. We had quite a few views, almost 800 people we reached. So, and I think that will continue to grow as in the coming days as people rewatch the recording of the video. So thank you, Casey and Kevin. And yeah, great. I'm going to sign us out. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
See you guys.